You're listening to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. In this episode, we'll be featuring Social Emotional Learning with Romance, a session that was presented at Children's Institute 2024 in New Orleans.
Romance is yes, it's genre fiction, but it's a lot more than that, and it gives people a lot more than that, and that's what you will hopefully be learning within this session. So again, I am Danielle Purnell. I am at King's Books in Tacoma, Washington. We are a large store with a very small staff. It's a lot of work. As a result, we all do everything. It's a lot of hands on deck, but it's also a lot of fun.
I am Nicole Brinkley. I'm the manager of Oblong Books in Rhinebeck, New York, and I do a smattering of other miscellaneous things.
True. I'm Haley Calvin. I'm from the Novel Neighbor in St. Louis, Missouri. I am the assistant events director and then a jack of all trades at my store as well.
I'm Sydney Wilson. I'm the author events coordinator at Little Shop of Stories in Decatur, Georgia. I'm so excited to be here.
Okay, so a quick rundown of our agenda. We're going to go over a couple of things. We're going to talk about the big R versus little R in romance, sex versus sexuality, what is social emotional learning, benefits of reading romance, what you should know, selling romance, and then also we're going to give you some actionable items that you can take back into any size of your store. So if you're like a small pop-up store or a large store like us, you can still take them in.
We love action items.
And again, romance is important because everyone deserves a love story, no matter who you are, no matter what your background is, no matter if you are queer, disabled, neurodivergent, like Ace. Everyone deserves a love story. So as you can tell from our slide deck, these are the books we're not talking about. Because, thank you. Because people have a very narrow idea of what romance is, specifically when it comes to romance for middle grade and for teens. So again, these are books we are not talking about. All right? Please stop telling people Pride and Prejudice and Little Women of Romance, because they're not.
And they're also not for teens.
They're also very much not for teens. This is what we are talking about. So, highly recommend. The other thing I want people to also remember is that just because somebody can read it does not necessarily mean they're emotionally ready to read that. We're going to talk more about that when we get into it, but that is something I do want to quickly mention. And then I believe Nicole has something she wants to say as well.
Oh, so age categories are so important. We're seeing a lot of conflation with teen and YA and adult age categories. We see it blurred a lot on social media. Adult romance serves different needs than teen and YA romance. So when publishers are conflating them in marketing, it's actually a problem because we actually don't know which needs that they are serving. So one of the things that's going to be so important to think about as we're thinking about actual teen and young adult romance is who their intended market is and are they serving those purposes. We're going to talk a lot about what social emotional learning specifically for teen and YA romance does. But again, adult is a totally different thing. Fine if teens are reading adult, if they're knowing, if they're consenting into it. I've been reading adult romance since I was 11, and my grandma lent me Nora Roberts books. And we're going to talk about how to know if a teen, how to recognize the difference between a teen who knows they're reading adult and a teen who doesn't realize they're reading adult because they've just been given things on TikTok, and what to do and how to navigate those spaces. But there are big differences between those age categories, and those age categories should be kept separate because they are serving different social, emotional, educational needs.
Slay.
All right, so now we're at the little R versus big R. So again, this is going to be talking about what the big romance is, which is the genre fiction, and then little romance are, and I believe all of my panelists have something to say about this.
Why don't we start with Sydney?
Let's start with Sydney.
Yeah, so as I've stepped into bookselling and I've had to learn the difference between this, because I didn't know this before I stepped into bookselling when I was reading romance as a kid, as someone who also read adult romances as a child, secretly though. So the way I've come to understand it and simplify it is big R romance is the genre. It tends to lean adult. That is where we'll get into sex versus sexuality later, but sex kind of becomes an expectation there, though it's not a requirement. while little r romance is a topic, and little r romance doesn't necessarily have to be romantic. There's love between parents and teachers and friends and pets and yourself, and it tends to be more of a topic and not an overall arching genre.
Truly, I could not have said that any better. Words from my mouth. And we're going to also talk about it in a different slide, but whenever we were meeting for this, Sydney brought up a good point that every story is a love story.
I stole that from Kate DiCamillo. Don't sue me, Kate.
Listen, this is a Sydney exclusive phrase for me now. And so just
Kate is out, Sydney
Kate
in.
Kate out, Sydney in. But just every story is a love story. So with that little r romance, every single story is a love story, whether that be platonic, romantic, parental, caregivers that aren't blood related. It explores different forms of love in a different little r category.
And when we're thinking of big R romance as a genre, that is that guaranteed happily ever after. That is a must if you are doing romance in as a genre. But when we're thinking of little r as well, we're thinking of short-circuited. We are thinking of those romances and love stories that are subplots to other stories. So romances that pop up in YA mysteries, relationships that pop up in contemporary novels. They might not necessarily be the focus of the story, but there's still that little R romance there, whereas the big R romance is both the focus of the story and guarantees that happily ever after.
And I do want to make something clear here. What a happily ever after means is that the characters are together. I don't care if that's 2 people, 3 people, 5 people. Yes, I've read that. The point is, they have ended together, and they are happily together. And they're alive. Please stop killing your characters, my God. Okay, so sex versus sexuality. I have a lot of thoughts about this because I've been reading romance since I was 10. I was 10 years old when I read my first Danielle Steele novel. I said, oh my God, Danielle, she's the same as me. However, again, I was very young for it, but I was also prepared for it. Because when we talk about sex is an act. Whereas sexuality, it's who you are. It's how you form relationships, whether those are platonic, but it's also who you don't have relationships with or your lack of sex. Because asexuality exists, aromanticism exists. And those things exist in romance. And for whatever reason, people act like they don't, but they do. And we're seeing it a lot more within the YA and middle grade genre, especially because those are the kids who are still exploring their identities. There are a lot of books that have ace characters that I genuinely wish I had when I was a kid. It would have cleared up a lot of things. Does anyone have anything they want to add on to that?
I will say that when we're thinking of sex and sexuality, in adult romance, sex is often erotic. It's meant to titillate. In young adult, it's often meant to convey an emotional connection, and whether that emotional connection is positive or negative depends on how it is written. So weirdly enough, John Green has talked really eloquently about this because people love to ban one of his books because it has a sex scene in it. And he's talked about the fact that that sex scene in the book is written clinically and coldly, and is to imply that you can have a physical relationship with somebody, but it doesn't mean you're emotionally connected to them. And then that same character shares a kiss with a different character later, and it's warm and uplifting. And in doing that, it is this subconscious education for teens through the written word of just because a physical act is happening does not mean the emotional connection is there. So when we're thinking of sex versus sexuality as well, specifically in the teen and YA space, there is that social emotional learning element of how are we conveying these things, how are we writing these things, and what are the ultimate purposes those scenes are serving. In YA, it is not to titillate, it is not erotic, it is to continue to grow and develop emotional relationships between characters or show the lack thereof.
Yeah, also to bounce off of this is me prefacing saying romance books should not equate sex education. But as someone who did not have sex education, big R romance was futile for me to be able to understand what sex was. And then exploring little r romance and being able to understand YA romance and exploring my sexuality as a queer teen in the Midwest was very important to be able to understand that this is sex, this is my sexuality. So developing further that social aspect of romance really helps that social and emotional growing, but the difference of sex and sexuality.
And going off of what Haley said, as someone who also did not have sex education, thank you, Georgia. Like little R, YA, and mid-grade romances were so instrumental in me not only exploring other sexualities, but seeing people that don't experience sexuality the same way I do and being able to relate to them better and be a better friend and a better supporter. And so they were just so instrumental in that part of my development as a person.
So what is social emotional learning? So again, this can happen in all ages and it's across all groups. It's basically the idea of what it is to develop healthy relationships, whether that be in the greater world, in your classroom, with your friends, among your peer, your teacher, your parents, even the healthy relationship with yourself. And we're seeing that in romance, it teaches a lot of things. It teaches you how to explore your identity. It introduces you to other people's gender identities. It can give you what it means to receive and give consent. It can also talk about boundaries and what it can feel like to objectively analyze these things. Because again, it's a separate way, it's taking a step back. So to give you an example, again, I'm Ace, I can't read MF relationships. I can't do it. I have a lot of feelings about that. But when I read an MM romance, it's taking me a step back. So I'm able to look at something through a different lens. Even if something I can't quote unquote relate to, it's something that I can kind of see pinpoints in, and therefore there's that line where I can see in the abstract. And we are going to talk about the abstract in just a moment here.
No, that graph does a pretty good job. Everybody just look and
internalize
the graph.
We worked a lot on that graph. So I do want to talk about how romance is a little bit divided within the in the traditional publishing world. So there is going to be that middle grade romance. There's also older teen, which is about like, there's younger teen, which is about 13 to 15 range, and then the older teen range, which is like 15 and then going up. And then did anyone have anything want to add to that?
No, we've already talked. Oh, I mean, we did talk a little bit about unlearning the shame from sexuality in terms of like the lack of sex education, and also like, you know, we live in a society, and that society is not always kind to folks who fall outside of perceived norms. So especially when we're thinking about quote unquote diverse romances, that gives readers a chance to be like, I am capable of being loved and I am capable of loving in a society that does not always tell them that that is acceptable. And that is a huge role that YA romance plays for teens. Because not only is it emotionally validating, but it is escapist fiction that can then help change their actual reality.
It helps you to unlearn shame, because kids are shamed for a lot of things, but it helps you unlearn shame.
Oh yeah, and we have on here my favorite point I love to hit on with escapist fiction. So escapist fiction, especially for teens, will literally rewire their brain. So when you read escapist books as an adult, but especially as a teen, when there are certain like highways in your brain that are still forming, the chemical release that your brain does when you are reading escapist fiction actually makes you relax. It makes you have a better memory. It makes you process trauma easier. So giving kids romances that are escapist, if that is what they are gravitating toward, will actually make them better, healthier people long term, chemically.
Science.
Okay, so really quickly, romance, when I said the abstract earlier. So the abstract is, let's say we are in a dystopian sci-fi world where society has completely collapsed and now some people can turn into werewolves, other people now need to drink blood for substance. Yes, this book exists and it's amazing. But it's an abstract world, so it's no longer at the forefront of like, I don't know why I feel this way or why I like this boy or why being touched here feels good. Now it's an abstract world of like, well, he's supposed to be my enemy, but I don't know why he's my enemy because I still feel something for him. It creates this, it's a fantasy in our heads, but it is still an abstract place because how many of us have related to someone in a fantasy world or related to a dragon or related to a frog? That's a big thing among Ace and Arrow people, by the way.
I mean, just also queer people. Frog and Toad is so real.
Frog and Toad,
Like,
everyone.
truly icons.
Yeah.
Frog and Toad are just friends. They're just friends who live together and sleep in the same bed.
And they were roommates.
But when we're thinking about that joy in the abstract, by putting things in the abstract, it can also allow teens and readers to process reality better. Sometimes taking things out of a specific real-world scenario then lets people have a chance to go, oh, wait, that's what I'm feeling, that's what I'm going through, in a way that like hard contemporary romance might not necessarily. And it's why having a variety of genres available in your store is so important. Concrete tip, have a wide variety of genres available in your store.
Okay, what we want, so this is where we're gonna have the actionable items, I believe. I know what the slide says, but these are gonna be items that you can take back into your store. So one of the things that I've done in our store recently as a teen section is I've done it into teen general, teen horror. We have a lot of weird horror kids in Washington State. Okay, and then we have teen romance. And by dividing it up in that section, it doesn't make people feel alienated, but it does help them go to the books that they're looking for specifically. Because again, teens are looking for a romance, but maybe they don't necessarily want there to be like a horror in their romance, or they want the romance to be the focus, or they don't want the romance to be the focus. And by doing that, and I know shelf space is everything, I know that like having your sections is everything, but by being a little bit more intentional when you do like your teen or your like middle grade section, it can be very helpful.
Are we doing our concrete action items now?
Concrete action items.
Great. Sydney, well, I keep leaping in first. Sydney, do you guys want to start?
I can go. So we had a little outline that we went through. So I was writing out some things and thinking about what we've done at Little Shop. And just, I think one of the most fun and unexpectedly educational things we did, you're gonna laugh when I say this, is we hosted a Tortured Poets Department release party. And thank you. And there was no age restrictions, because we did an Emily Henry one right after that. I went to both and I wanted to die. I was so tired. But there was no age restrictions, and so we had little kids that I had in summer camp at the bookshop, and we had adult regulars. And the way they were all interacting with each other and interacting with the music with each other was so cool. And you could see these older women who were like, that sounds not like a good relationship, if you know what I'm talking about. And these little girls were interacting with them, and it wasn't just little girls, but these kids were interacting with them, and just seeing how they started analyzing, like, how should I be treated in a relationship was just so unexpected and really sweet. And so that was a great way to do that. And another thing that I've really taken to heart is making sure, even if you don't read romance yourself, that's totally fine. I mean, I'll probably think about it for a while, but that's fine, is having go-to authors. So maybe you don't want to spend a lot of time reading romance and getting into the nuance, but knowing that you can recommend Julian Winters to an older teen that's looking for something, or Lynn Painter is one of my favorites to recommend. A new author, Nishay Jones, just did Courtesy of Cupid. It's a mid-grade romance, and it's so wonderful. It's so cute. And just having those authors in your back pocket that you know these certain things about them is so helpful when you're talking to a kid that does want romance and you're not really sure quite what to do.
So like, kind of hop off of that, we have a lot of kids in our store that come in specifically going to the romance section without like bringing back, not knowing if it's like big R or little r. And so we will never not sell a book to we won't not sell a book to anyone, but if like the teen doesn't know if there is like sex on page and they're like, oh, I'm not ready for that yet, it's just to have like those recommendations in your back pocket. We have a lot of like younger teens coming in for Icebreaker by Hannah Grace, and then my favorite thing to do is to recommend the Icebreaker YA novel about two queer boys with like, it's so good and it has the same title, and it's so funny because it's also like you're giving them a queer person of color recommendation, and it's like you're knocking out like the diversity so that way they're like experiencing something outside of what they normally read, while also taking care of like these teens that are willing to explore like sex and sexuality, and just being able to have these adult comps to YA to middle grade. Teens and middle grade readers are reading up, like especially with the rise of like TikTok, BookTok. They're seeing these cartoon covers thinking that they are for them, but you just need to redirect them, make sure that like they're learning safely, being taken care of, and if they are ready for big R romance, to put the healthy relationships in their hands first. So even if that's closed door romance or romance where they are like fully consenting adults and like taking care of each other, putting forth a healthy relationship before they start going into like the deeper end and exploring more with the sex aspect of big R romance.
I do want to quickly say, if you want any of the recommendations on these titles, the slide has a clickable link where you can find all the titles that we're recommending. We did a lot of work in
We made you a catalog.
We made you a catalog. We did a lot of work in gathering authors, of gathering titles. It's very diverse. There's a lot of queer titles. There's neurodivergent characters. There's disabled characters. There's ace characters. There's black and brown characters. There's indigenous characters. The list goes on and on.
Backlist and front list.
Yes, backlist and front list. We did a lot of work in creating this list. Also, please read Icebreaker because I need more black hockey players in my life.
It's so good, you guys. If you haven't read it yet, please read it so I can talk to you about it. It's my favorite book. Okay.
Nicole, can I jump back in? I totally
Do it.
Okay. The one thing I forgot to talk about, which is silly because I'm the event coordinator, but events. So there are two that come to mind when I think about this and introducing kids to romance and encouraging them in their romance journey. Bookstore Romance Day. You can do so many things with Bookstore Romance Day. We've made cork boards where you can put what you're reading now, and we'll give away galleys. And it's just a great way to let readers know, like, this is a place where you can find these things and you will be safe and supported. And people will help you find what you like. And then my last one is one that's starting up really soon that I'm really excited about at Little Shop is our middle grade romance book club. And we have a curated, I'm so excited, we have like a curated list of titles that we've chosen, but of course we're open to having the kids add. We just wanted to give them a basis. And not only are you providing titles for these kids, but also people to talk to about these books. And that was a big part of something we talked about in our pre-discussion was gossip and how good it is for your brain and how romance novels can provide healthy gossip. So you're not talking about people that really exist, but you're still learning how to interact with people and analyze their actions and how they relate to you and how they're different from you. So book clubs, they're awesome, especially when they're with middle schoolers. They're so fun.
I have one last thing. Also, curated lists will get you like so far. You curate a list for those kids, you're evergreen. But to also play off of Romance Bookstore Day, if you also have like a kids section for your Romance Bookstore Day, register online to be a store listed on the Romance Bookstore Day website to keep it going. There was not enough bookstores last year who signed up, so they're like, oh, should we keep doing it? Please sign up to be a registered bookstore for Romance Bookstore Day so we can keep doing the Romance Bookstore Day for adults, teens, middle grade, so that way we can keep it going.
It's a great program. I have so many notes now because I've said so many things. So pardon, I'm going to talk for a minute. One, in regards to what Sydney said, we all know that reading is not a solo act, it's a community act. And part of our role as booksellers is knowing what books are suitable for our community and having those conversations. And I don't mean suitable as in like, oh, they shouldn't be reading that. I mean suitable as in like matching readers with the books they want to read. So yes, there are going to be lots of teens coming into your store who are like, I want to read, I mean, this is a slightly outdated one now because she's finally dipping again, but I want to read Colleen Hoover, and I'm 11. And you're like, all right, how do I navigate that conversation? And we say navigate it, but like sometimes it can be hard to be like, how do I do that specifically? Action items. I love action items. So one of the things you can do is having like a friendly, almost joking approach to it of being like, oh, there's a lot of sex in that, right? And being like, oh, that's in the adult section, but I have this great YA book I want to show you, and gently rerouting them. If they push back and they know, then you're in the clear. But they will often flag for you if they are not. Then it'll be like, oh, okay. I also like, parents will come in and be like, oh, my kid wants X and XYZ. And I go, oh, how old are they? And they go, oh, they're 13. And I go, oh, did you know? Fun fact, if they could still totally read it, and I always am like, I've been reading adult romance since I was 11. If you think that they're good with that, that's good to go. Again, we never want to shame readers for what they are reading and what they are interested in. Oh, are we at time? Oh, it is that time. I couldn't see your legs.
Oh.
Sorry, we were making Preeti can for us as an indicator of time. So I will finish up my concrete action items very quickly then. Anyway, having those conversations is super important. one of the other best tools you have is in this room with you right now. Look around. You know other booksellers. You have Edelweiss. You can see other booksellers' reviews. So the best thing you can do is to read romance. The next best thing you can do is have somebody on your staff who reads romance. But if you don't have time to read every romance novel, if you're a small store and you can't hire somebody who's reading romance because you have to hire like an accountant and money is hard, use the resources you have available to you. So check the Edelweiss reviews, ask your sales reps, like what level are we looking at in terms of like, do we see this aimed at 16 and up? Does this have a lot of sex in it? And those resources will help. Also, like, just do your research on spice levels generally. For instance, and on comp titles generally.
Nicole, I don't want to cut you off, but we are at time. I just want to quickly say, one thing we don't want to say is shelf talkers. Shelf talkers.
Till 12:10.
No. I mean, because
For
we
Q&A.
want to leave time for Q&A.
Yes. Oh, I know my last thing.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I was about to say that and shelf talkers. You're good. You did.
talkers.
Yeah, shelf talkers, because when kids come into sections for recommendations, again, this is a community thing. Kids will just pick up what they see on social media. Otherwise, they will just be left in the lurch. So put shelf talkers in your sections and do your research so that you know that for comp titles, Ashley Poston's backlist is great for younger YA, but Allie Hazelwood's YA, you want to give that to 16 and up. Now Q&A.
Oh, so I also just want to say, if you also do research into who you shouldn't carry in your stores, because I don't think we talk about that enough. If you want to know who you shouldn't carry, I will happily tell you, because a lot of people carry Colleen Hoover because it sells. She's a terrible person, like horrible human being. And again, I will happily give you a list of who you shouldn't carry. I will just say that really quick. If you're doing any if you're a pop-up store, if you are a very small store, you don't need to carry more than like say two titles at a time, or say 3 titles at a time. I even have manga on this list. All you have to do is carry the first volume and you'll be golden.
There is a lot of good romance manga for teens, and teens love graphic novels. So again, like we know how well Heartstopper did. Do not shy away from those, even if they're not the things that you would normally read. Shall we switch to Q&A?
And we'll switch to Q&A.
Okay, so time for Q&A. If you raise your hand, Preeti will bring you a microphone. If you speak into the microphone, I will be happy. If you yell, I'll find you. What will I do? I don't know.
If no one has a question, I will perform the Eras tour right now.
She will. Please don't let that happen.
All 3 hours.
We'll be here for a while, but it'll be worth it.
Thank you.
Hi, Dawn.
So we don't have anybody in our store who reads romance. We have, like peripheral staff that isn't in our store. So we get a little bit of feedback. But the debate going on in our store is, should we label it in some way? Should we put a pepper on something? Should we in our YA section? So then how do we guide that if we haven't read it and people come in and just shop there?
Yeah. So, would you like to go first?
So I would when it comes to labeling, I would be extremely careful about that, because it leads into othering. I grew up othered. I was always in the other section. And you never want to do that to a kid, because again, it makes them feel low and it teaches them shame. So I'm always very careful when it comes to labeling. Now, if you're talking in terms of spice level, if you're talking in terms of like what the actual content of the book is, you don't need to read it. Give it a quick skim. Even go on Goodreads and read reviews about it. There's always that person on Goodreads, I'm that person, who will write you like a 50 paragraph read up of the book, will give you like the different chilies, give their different hearts. So there's always different ways to get around actually reading the book if you don't have the time or no one on staff to do it.
Yes, so everybody in here, like your fellow booksellers on Edelweiss will also usually mention things like that, and that is good to know. Your sales reps can tell you. Flicking through the books is good, but I would also caution against putting spice levels on anything in adult or in kids. We are in a rampant area of book banning right now, and all it takes is one person to come into that store and see that spice level, and you're going to see that start to get challenged in your community. So unfortunately, it is just a thing that you can do research on. I will often make cheat sheets and leave them at my desk for my coworkers who are not as skilled at teen and kids books as I am. So if you do research and make a cheat sheet, that can be helpful to folks in a pinch.
Oh. Another good resource for figuring out content in books is Storygraph, because Storygraph
Love
has
Storygraph.
user-generated content warnings. I think you usually need to make an account to view them, but once you do, if you just have it logged in on your store computers, you can look up books and you can just glance at the content warnings and see how many people listed them as well. So that might be a helpful resource when you're trying to figure out which books to hand sell to which customers.
For those of you unfamiliar with Storygraph, it is a Goodreads alternative that is independent and Black-owned. It is fantastic.
One more thing to hop on that. Ingram also gives you age
I was
categories
gonna say the
as
same
well. So you can always check iPage, and iPage will give you a brief
12
age
up, 14
range. And my favorite thing to do, I took this from my coworker Maddie. Shout out Maddie. She loves to download the arcs from Edelweiss and to check before she reads it if it's open door, closed door, or even in her YA she'll type in sexual phrases like thrust, and the amount of times it pops up will tell you how spicy a book is or not, so you can kind of base it off of that, and it is a game changer.
And you can preview those galleys straight in Edelweiss without having to download them too.
Oh, you can do that.
I was just going to say, I'll say, also use your communities as well. So I know a bunch of my coworkers are in some Facebook groups and Slack groups and things like that. So if you're wondering, what are some good romances to recommend to a 10-year-old, an 11-year-old, then use your friends. That's why they're here. I personally would love to recommend books, so go for it.
One thing we do at my store is instead of saying chili pepper or spice level or something like that, we just list the tropes.
Yeah.
Typically on the back side of the shelf talker, so that if you're really getting into it, you can say this fades to black, enemies to lovers, and there's a lot more, I think, education and awareness around the labels for those tropes that can call people in instead of push them away, and you're not saying ooh, censor. It's just oh yeah, I know, I love enemies to lovers. So
Yeah, if a book has only one bed, there's an implication there.
Thank you. First, I want to acknowledge how much preparation and work you all did clearly for this event. Thank you so much. I'm curious about if any of you have anything you'd add as far as insights or best practices around the intersection of Little R romance, social emotional learning, and your school partnerships. Anything around the ways that you work with schools and how it connects to what you've been sharing today.
So we work a lot with schools, our bookstore. We work a lot with Tacoma Public Schools and then Clover Park School District. One thing that we do is we just carry the books. That's kind of what I was talking about when I say if you're a pop-up store or if you're a very small store, just carry them with you because then kids will read them. You don't necessarily have to sell them even that hard. It's everything from carrying things like Frog and Toad or even Love Violet, which is an amazing picture book. Yes. It's everything from carrying your middle grade books. It's everything from carrying your teen books. I tend to not bring adult books when I'm doing book fairs at schools. There's just not necessarily a need for it, and I don't have the energy for that one parent to get pissed off at me. So I would say if you're going to do a school event, don't bother with bringing adult books. Just tell them it's in store. If they even want to order it from you, you can even write down on a slip and make sure and tell your coworker at the store, hey, put this aside for so-and-so if they want the book, right? But if I would just not do it. And that's coming from a liberal state. I'm in a very blue state. It's very liberal, very progressive. So if you're not like how I am, definitely just across the board, just don't bother bringing adult books to your school events. You're gonna have pushback. And like Nicole said, we're in a book banning era. And the last thing you want is these books to get banned.
Hi, I'm from a red state. So we partner with our schools very frequently. We work with private schools, we work with public schools, and to kind of combat this, our librarians are some of the best librarians, especially like in Missouri right now. They are doing so much work to be able to get these books to these kids. And so what we have done is whenever we do book fairs or book events with schools, we will have a curated like set list of like little R romance in YA and middle grade depending on the age of the school. And so we do the research, we all kind of read around. And so we try our best to make sure it's diverse, it's queer, but not actively like it doesn't look like romance, but it is still romance. What parents love to hear, especially like in Missouri, is that like they don't want kissing on page. So middle grade romances are evergreen. Queer middle grade romances will always be great. They are just they see like two girls on like the cover that are like holding hands. They're like, we can't have that. And like the upper YA is a little bit harder, so we don't bring upper YA at all unless if the school requests it. So it's a little bit harder in redder states, so we have to be very careful with what we bring to schools, but we never not bring romance to like book fairs and school events and school fairs.
I'm not really, so you can go.
I also just want to hammer home, like, if you have librarians in your schools that you can work with, build those relationships up. I know not every school does, and I know not every school has a good librarian. But the ones that do are really important. Specifically when we're thinking little R, I do want to hit home that the middle grade romances or middle grade books with those little R's that do explore sexuality or have first crushes, but that aren't necessarily about like the big R romance, are so good to have and to be able to recommend. A good one that's come out in hardcover recently, that's on the fantasy side, is Curse of Eelgrass Bog, which is just quietly sapphic, but it's this fantasy, his weird little mystery that I describe as for kids who want to roll around in the dirt. And then just came out in paperback, was a former Indies Introduced pick, is Hazel Hill is going to win this one.
That one is also so good.
Which is like feminist middle grade John Carter must die, but the main character is just a lesbian and nobody knows. And it's not a big deal of the story. Neither of these things look like it on the cover. Knowing those books, doing that research, and forming those connections so that you can talk to the librarians and get those into libraries, book fairs, etc. Really, really good.
I said I didn't have anything, but I actually do. You reminded me. One book that I wrote down that I did want to talk about, and I was reminded of it because it's not the main part of the story, and that is a good way to sneakily, if you have to, get some romance into your schools, is little R doesn't have to be the overarching genre, it's a topic within it. And so I just wanted to bring up Candidly Klein by Catherine Ormsby, which is very Taylor Swift if your kids are into Taylor Swift.
And they are.
And they are. And so are we. So,
the table is divided.
I was going to say, we're a divided table. But it's about a girl named Klein, and she kind of sweet talks her way into going to a songwriting workshop, maybe scams her way in a little bit. And she does end up having her first crush on a girl. And so she's kind of exploring her first crush period and then her first crush on a girl. And so you have this big main topic of like songwriting, and she wants to be a star, and does she have what it takes to make it? She's also dealing with some grief. But then you also have the side plot of this really sweet first-time romance. So yeah, I think making sure, again, with being careful with the covers, it's her with a guitar on the front. She is blonde with curly hair. So
Do we have other questions?
I did see hands. I don't know where they went, though.
I'll just start yelling book recommendations at you.
so true.
Right up front. We're getting your steps in today.
You're doing amazing, sweetie.
I actually have a lot of questions, but I'm going to focus to one. Danielle, you mentioned that we should do our research on who we shouldn't carry in the store. Is there anyone specific in the middle grade YA space who you think shouldn't be in stores and shouldn't be recommended to this group?
So the nice thing is that when it comes to middle grade and teen kids do the work for me. I don't have to know who not to carry. They'll tell me who not to carry. What I mean by that is that a lot of authors have their social media, they have their private Facebook groups, which is a huge thing, or they'll say, or they come from the indie world, where the indie world is a whole different genre that I love, right? But as a result, there's not necessarily anybody within teen or middle grade that is pretty egregious. If things come up, then obviously that changes things. But as of right now, there isn't anyone egregious. Like, when I think of truly egregious people that I'm sickened to see in stores, someone like Jamie McGuire. Like, Jamie McGuire, I'll say it. It's being recorded. The ABA will hear this. I will say this now. She literally said in her Facebook group that black people deserve to die. Like, literally, she just literally said that. Yeah. And when people posted about it and the indie romance community came together, got her out, said she's terrible, awful, no one wanted to work with her. Christina Lauren even, like, appalled them and said she's a horrible person. Why would anyone want to work with her? She's now a traditionally published author. I've seen her in bookstores. Like, that's what I mean by truly egregious people. So in that sort of space, I can always give you, I'm always checking. I'm always keeping up to date.
Yeah, this is more of a problem in the adult romance space, especially with indie authors who have been kicked out of the indie space and then kind of wiggle their way into trad pubs. So we won't linger on it too much here, but do talk to Danielle about it afterwards because she knows so much about the adult romance space, and she's really brilliant in that regard.
I will also pipe in the middle grade space, J.K. Rowling.
Is not your friend.
She's not your friend. Your queer folks that are going to be coming into your store, if they see J.K. Rowling or her alias Robert Galbraith on your shelf, they will probably not feel like your store is a safe space. Mm-hmm. And I understand Harry Potter still sells. What we have done is we carry, I think, the first 2 on the shelf, but we only carry 1. And if we want to special order the rest of the series, we will specifically special order those books for our customers, but we want to make it a bigger safe space. And I know this is separate from romance, but we have a collection on our shelf that's Harry Potter alternatives, so magical schools with queer kids to make them feel safe and have a newer generation of this magical school vibes where they see themselves in these characters.
If you are not a buyer at your store and have no control over whether or not you're stocking Harry Potter, we carry the original Harry Potter books. We don't carry Galbraith. We don't carry any other tie-ins and swag. But one of the things that we do, and a thing that you can do regardless of your position in the store, is make a "Do you like Harry Potter? Try X" recommendation list. Tuck it as a shelf talker with the books, make a little display of it, and you can just gently start redirecting away from Rowling, who, if you do not keep up on it, is deeply transphobic and is now bordering or has explicitly said anti-Holocaust statements. We love when, beloved children's figures become Holocaust deniers. It's a great time.
But the great thing is we have better alternatives now.
We have better alternatives now. So that's not specifically romance related, but it's a good thing to keep in mind if we're thinking about just kids' representation generally.
So in our store, we originally carried the Harry Potter series because we know it all sells.
Yeah.
But we had a former coworker or employee who is trans and brought to our attention that that's not okay.
Yeah.
So we don't carry them on the shelves anymore. They are in the basement with our overstock. We make the people ask for them.
Yeah.
And then we'll say, which one are you looking for? And we'll specifically go down and get it. Or we'll special order them if we have to. But that's just not something we even carry anymore. One title, on the shelf. One title that I do like to point people to is the Nevermore series by Jessica Townsend, which I think is fabulous, and I very much Harry Potter vibes.
Yeah,
so
amazing. Do we have any more questions about romance? I know we all want to talk about this now. And I will flag that to the ABA.
Again, if you want a panel on that, but yeah.
Tell them in your feedback that we got sidetracked and you want to see that.
Hello. Oh my God. So I have and it's my proudest thing, I have a youth advisory board at my store. 7th grade and up, they read all this stuff. And I have a couple of kids in there who all they want to read is romance. And they're so excited for it, and I love it. And I'm trying to give them arcs, and I'm trying to give them things, and they just don't want them, which is totally fine. They know what they want to read. They want to read the adult romance. They know what they're getting into. But I've been trying to open conversation with them about the kind of differences and why those differences exist and stuff. And I was wondering if you had any books in mind or anything like that, or anything that's coming out or anything that you think is a good, I don't know. I just
transition back into YA?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Transition back into YA. Because like, I can think of like 4 or 5 kids who come to mind, and like, they're so passionate about those books and they're so excited for them, and I want them to keep that excitement and not
After you.
go. But yeah.
So really quickly, like I said, we did have a thing about older teens.
Yeah.
So older teen is a very good transition back into YA. Like Haley said, Icebreaker is a great example of getting back into YA. Amanda DeWitt, who wrote Ren Martin Explains It All, a great transition back into YA. So titles like that will get them back into it. I know we both feel the same. I know we all kind of feel the same way about this, of like policing kids. But if you do want to focus on getting them back into YA, there are like titles that we do have listed here. And I know Nicole also has ones like right on top of the head.
Yeah, and so what I will also say is there are so many adult romance authors who also write YA romance. So you can use that as a transition from one to the other. So, are you reading Talia Hibbert's adult? Give them the YA. Are you reading Ashley Poston's adult? Give them the YA. Allie Hazelwood's adult? Give them the YA.
Lynn
Julie Murphy's
Painter.
adult?
Lynn
Give them the
Painter.
YA.
Lynn Painter.
Painter. So there are a bunch of ones that you can use, and not even mentioning even that it's YA, being like, oh, did you know they have this other book, this backlist title, this XYZ, and just sliding it into them. That way you're not presenting it as like, but this is their YA. It's just, did you know they have this other book? And it seems like you're really on top of it. We do also have a lot of other comp titles, so if they're reading like Sarah J. Maas, I give them Margaret Rogerson, right? Like, thank you. Great scene in Enchantment of Ravens about consent that has nothing to do with sex, but also everything
So
to do with
good.
sex. So just being on top of like those comp titles and not presenting it as sliding back into YA, but instead being like, oh, I really like this, and I know that if you read this, you'll like it too.
I also had some comp titles that I'm going to throw in. So for Emily Henry fans, or specifically people we meet on vacation, One True Loves by Elise Bryant is great. It has that travel element. It's very cute. It was on the screen. For Love Hypothesis, if they want like a nerdy protagonist, there's Dungeons and Drama by Kristen Boyce. And then a little bit niche, but it's one of my favorite books, Wisteria Society of Lady Scoundrels.
So good.
Okay, thank you. A Fragile Enchantment by Alison Sapp that just came out. I finished it on the way here, and it was beautiful. So those are also good.
I will also shout out Dungeons, what is it called?
Dungeons and Drama.
Dungeons and Drama, that's what I thought. The cover is so similar to a lot of adult books that I don't think they would notice that you were giving them YA.
I was also going to say Rachel Lynn Solomon is a great bridge, as well as like if like Alexine Farrell Fulmouth, shout out to my girl. She has YAs that are very like women-centered, that are like so powerful. She wrote My Mechanical Heart and the 12th Night retelling, and they're perfect.
So we are at time. Okay, one more
One more?
question.
Oh, it's very simple. So I co-run the Romance Book Club at our bookstore, and it's a lot of fun, and it's like almost intergenerational. Like there's women in their early 20s, and there's people in their 50s. But one person asked if they could bring their twin teen daughters, and all of a sudden it felt like that it wasn't really going to fly with the club. So I guess my question is, those of you who run book clubs and run romance book clubs, what would you suggest? Because I also work at a high school library, and I know there's a market for that, but I didn't know how to answer that question.
Yeah. So book club itself is a community. We run a 70, 80 person romance book club. It is massive. It is intense. We only have one teen tween book club, just because for us teens end up not coming to our book clubs, but book clubs in general are a community-based thing. So if the book club itself is oh, we're not comfortable with that yet until we talk about it, having hard conversations with your book club, hard conversations with those twin teens. But if the group is for them coming, please let them come. This is a safe space for them to explore romance with this intergenerational book club. So having those discussions with your book club is definitely the first step, but definitely opening it up would be beneficial to those teens, seeing so many different ages reading romance that they're interested in.
I was just going to say that I run the romance book club, and because of the energy of the book club, I wouldn't have teens there just because like it wouldn't be appropriate. But again, it depends. Like Haley said, it's a community space. So if it is a welcoming space for teens, that's a different conversation. But it completely depends on the people like who are in the book club. But again, we are at time.
If you want to talk to us, we'll be lingering around a few minutes. But thank you.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you for listening to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. Additional educational resources can always be found on the ABA website at www.bookweb.org. Happy reading!